ngā reo karanga era o ngā ruahine o Waikato, i te Tangihanga mo te ariki nui te atairangi kāhu i te tau 2010. Hinana ki uta, hinana ki tai. Tāire te aroha o ngā iwi puta noa kua kotahi mai ki runga o Tuurangawaewae. Toia mai te aroha ki runga ki tō tātou Kingi, Tuheitia, potatau te wherowhero, te tuawhetu, me tana whariariki kua pauri nei. Welcome to Mata with me, Mihingarangi Forbes, recorded here at Tuurangawaewae Marae, Ngārua Wāhia. Over the past 5 days, tens of thousands of people have arrived here to mourn the 7th Māori monarch, Kiingi Tuheitia potatau te wherowhero, te tuawhetu. He was just 69 years old and is survived by his wife, Te Makau Ariki, and their 3 tamariki, Whatumuana, Korotangi, and Ngā Waihono i te pō. To discuss the King's contribution to Te Ao Māori and the enduring legacy of Kingitanga, we're fortunate to be joined by 3 special guests. Waikato Tainui General Manager for Communications and Engagement, Jason Ake, all the way from Paeroa, Ngā Iwi FM broadcaster, Rangi Pokiha, and Waikato Communications Specialist and former journalist, Amomai Pihama. Tēnā koutou, thank you for joining us here at Tuurangawaewae. We're just across from the marae where Kingi Tuheitia is lying in state. But Amomai, that audio at the top was of the lady, Te Ariki Nui Te Atairangi Kāhu, as she was travelling along the awa to her resting place. I hoki mahara, ngā mahara mō?
Yeah, well, tēnā koe mihi, o tira tēnā tātou. Yeah, listening to that brought back a lot of emotion. I was, 18 years younger? We were younger in our 20s then, but very...
Were you reporting?
Yeah, I was down here being a junior reporter at the time. However, also being from Waikato, very emotional. She was so loved, the lady, and I could hear it in those karanga, the hotu, tamamai, and... You know, it's what we're all feeling at the moment as well.
Rangi hea tāhua, we'll be hearing more of that again in a few days. Do you remember, kōrero from your mātua at the time?
Well, actually, hoki aku mā harahara iau e tamaiti ana. However, we were not fortunate enough to be within te ao o te Kingitanga, heoi anō. As I've grown up, I was brought up by te whare o te Tumuaki, which is Wirimu Tamihana, te whare o Tarapi Pipi. So the likes of Matua Mokoro Gillett, who is one of the many rangatira of Ngāti Haua, has embedded into me the tikanga of te whare o te Tumuaki and me ki ko rātou te taituara o te Kingitanga. So rather not the Kingitanga I was brought up in, however te whare o te Tumuaki go hand in hand.
Kia ora. And just for our listeners, I'm going to bring Jason Ake in here. For our listeners who don't quite understand the structure of the Kingitanga, we have Rangi here talking about another house of the Kingitanga. Can you kind of, tui the kōrero, bring it all together for us, how it works? Set out the Kingitanga for us.
Yeah, I think on a basic level, the Kingitanga was born out of land sales that occurred right across the country. And what we needed at that time was a mechanism to put a halt to the wholesale land sales that were taking place. The treaty, of course, guaranteed that land sales would be facilitated by the Crown, but that wasn't the case at all. And when a number of rangatira across the country saw their land disappearing, they decided, as they did, to find a way to combat that, because very quickly what they saw was the alienation of land and the potential effects that would have on their respective iwi. And from that moment, the Kingitanga was born, the seed was planted.
Over the last few days, the initial days we had Hauraki, where you're from, Rangi, and Maniapoto, and actually Te Waka o Tainui has come on. And in the last few days we have had almost every iwi and huge groups of them coming on. Some say that the Kingitanga is only a Waikato thing, but Jason, can you explain the connection to other iwi?
Yeah, there are connections across other iwi, and they are deeply embedded in the leadership that was present at the time, that the question was being raised right across the country. If anything, there is an absolute belief in the title of ariki. We are one of not many iwi who can say that their ariki lines have continued throughout the passages of time. And so that's what we see here, is iwi and tribes recognising arikitanga in its most pure form.
When Jason was mentioning before Amomai that iwi were coming together to resist those early land sales, and they did. They looked to England, to their royal family, and thought, well, that has power. Maybe we should do something similar. But it actually led to a boiling point. And early in the 1860s, what happened then?
Yeah, so going off the back of what Jason just said, King Pōtatau came into his role in the late 50s, I think 58. And so I think at the time, and keeping in mind that Governor Grey and his troops had been ravaging through the lands, through Taranaki at the time, Waikato had gone down to support them through that. So one of the first things that King Pōtatau did, and his reign was only short, 2 years into Tāwhiao's time.
He was 86 when he passed.
Correct, yeah. So, yeah. Tāwhiao ensured that there was an Aukati line just north of Rangiriri, which was a deliberate and direct stance to support what Jason had just said about preventing the confiscation, the illegal sale of lands that was happening everywhere. That support came from many of the chiefly lines of iwi throughout the motu for Tāwhiao to do that. So at that time, in the early 60s, Governor Grey saw that as a direct insult to their campaign, and it was his intention to ensure that Kingitanga fell. So we saw what happened, or those who may not know, Governor Grey with around 18,000 troops, because their stronghold at the time was in Auckland, so the next stop was going to be Waikato. We have very fertile farming lands here, but that intention was to diminish Kingitanga. They could see it as a threat. So through Te Rangiriri, and we began the Waikato land wars. It swept through our iwi here in Waikato and to other Tainui iwi through Maniapoto-Raukawa, even into Hauraki, and many were killed.
Tauranga, and it went.
And then they went on to Tauranga. So they were not able to get rid of Kingitanga. King Tāwhiao and his people sought refuge in the King country. Grey carried on to Tauranga, and I suppose that just tells us of the resilience that Kingitanga has had since that time.
Absolutely. And Rangi, the Kingitanga doesn't have constitutional powers, but he mana tō te Kingitanga. Talk to us about, you growing up and knowing the might of the Kingitanga.
Well, I guess back when I was a little child, my kuia, my ruruhi, they would always come to support our Kingi. And I guess when you think about te mana o te Kingitanga, it's not just of Waikato Tainui. Te mana o te Kingitanga ko te mana o tātou tiwi Māori. And koena tāku, I guess when you think about it, it is true. Our king was a king for not only just us tiwi Māori, but for the whole world. I looked back to his koroneihana last week, where he had brought together the Timona Nuiaki with the Ariki, the king of Tonga, and to see that is such a privilege, especially on his 18th coronation me ki. And myself as a rangatai, seeing all of this coming into plan, and now that our Kingi has passed on, we still see the kotahitanga, the mana motuhake o te Kingitanga o te rao tātou tiwi Māori.
We've been hearing some replays of Kingi Tuheitia's speeches in recent times, the huia motu, the coronation, and just, so relevant. He's talking about tamariki, he's talking about the future. Jason, you've been sitting around the pai with rangatira from around the motu coming. What messages are you hearing?
I think more than that, been observing from the side on some of the messages that have flowed first and foremost, it's the first message really has been the absolute lament for the loss of a king, especially at this time. And it's really hard to remove the politics from where we're sitting, the contemporary politics and the environment where we find ourselves in. Because at the Hui Motu earlier this year, I think we saw a growing influence in the message, which was, let's just be Māori.
Yeah.
And if you just be Māori, we'll be okay. And then further on into Koroneihana, carrying that message on again. But it has certainly resonated, in my view, with a number of people who find themselves in a contemporary place, a cost of living crisis, where they can find some sort of something to lift them up at a time where it's really difficult. And given some of the politics that is occurring at the moment, it's seen as a source of strength and unity. Te Kiingi o te kotahitanga, that's been the key message over the entire time that we've been here.
I tōna oranga, I tōna mate, in his life and in his death. And it makes me think of people like Princess Te Puye. At times, when times were difficult, we had these rangatira throughout the kahui ariki that were able to lift people. People might not know this, but you were heavily involved in organising Hui Motu as a communications specialist for the iwi. Were you surprised by the support, by the numbers that were turning up? And I'm not saying it was easy to organise, but, it's easier when people are willing.
First of all, I wasn't heavily involved. I just played my part to support the kaupapa.
Humility.
So Hui Motu, absolutely. It was massively attended. I don't even know that we were expecting that many people to turn up, but I think it was the timeliness of it. It was the fact that King and his office were hugely supportive of providing that platform to our people at the time, and so I think that it's instances like that our King will be remembered for. That has triggered a flow-on effect that I think we've seen throughout the motu at all the big hui Māori that have taken place since right till now. Yeah. And that was sincere on his part. That came from King. There wasn't any manufacturing of that behind the scenes. That was his call. And so his people ensured that the platform was provided. And we heard in his kōrero that it came from the heart.
Most New Zealanders that didn't know Kingi Tuheitia personally would probably have just watched him on the podium delivering speeches, but you've been around him and we've heard on the paipai, he's cheeky, he likes to tell jokes, and we saw a little bit of that at Hui Motu. Will you miss that about him?
Yeah, I will. I think over his time he grew in confidence to be able to articulate his own feelings and his own messages, and we we have a bit of a chuckle at ourselves at times, knowing that King will probably go off script at some point, but we've seen in the last few years just how on point those messages have been from King when he has gone off script, and he's so relatable to all age groups, all demographics. He, one would think in his position that they would try to execute perfect articulation, and not that King didn't, but he wanted to ensure that he was reaching the hearts and minds of everybody. He has just average Joe blogs people in his whānau, so he wanted to make sure it resonated with them as well. So yeah, and he did have a little cheeky side to him. I didn't know King well, but I have spent times with him through mahi and various things. He had a very soft side to him, a very cheeky side to him at times, brought out best by his children from my observation, and it will be missed. Sorely missed. Yeah.
He always talked about rangatahi. That was his focus, and all of his speeches he ended with rangatahi. our next monarch will be young. Our population is young. 30% of under 15-year-old New Zealanders are Māori. So, how do you see the future and the messages that you receive from Kingi Tuheitia for you guys?
I'm
saying this because Rangi, sorry, you can't see Rangi, but Rangi's young.
I guess one of the kōreros that did resonate with me while he was still alive, I don't know if it was this koronehana gone, but I think it was last year, and he talked about tākiri tū ko te kotahitanga, and it really resonated with me because not only was he talking his walk, I guess you could say, but he was the embodiment. I look back to his last koronehana, once again he brought Te Mana Nui a Kiwa, and as you listen to the orators of the Te Mana Nui a Kiwa whānau, they talked about how never in their lives have they ever seen the islands together, their rangatiras sitting together, eating together in fact. So personally, as a rangatahi me ki he ao kaitua, there is definitely, I look at the likes of Hana Rāwhiti, who's paving the way within the parliament. I look at the likes of our young broadcasters in Aukaha and as such, and it's bright for us not only in Te Ao Māori but for us in New Zealand. I definitely also look at the Green Party's MP, how young she is and how vibrant she is. Her wairua is just so ngāwari. So he ao kei tua mō tātua ngai rangatahi ai. And it's not only because of Hana Rāwhiti, but it's also because of our king, who had allowed us to be just us, to be unapologetically Māori, to be unapologetically youthful, me ki rā. So, I absolutely agree.
Jason, I'm not suggesting that you're the expert of what's happening next, but today's a big day. It's Tuesday, and my understanding is that there are hui going on that follow the tikanga that's happened every single time that one of our monarch have died, and that we're looking for the next one. What is the Te Kaumārua? How does it operate? Who's in it?
So from a functional perspective, Te Kaumārua is the group of the King's Council of people who are appointed to help provide advice to him on matters of tikanga across the country, and a whole range of other things, to be honest. So he leans in, they lean in, they lean out when they require or they seek that sort of support. And what Te Kaumārua does is it provides not a tribal perspective, but a more whānui perspective of Aotearoa. And
You're
some
meaning
key
outside
people
of the Waikato?
Yeah,
So
outside of the Waikato.
Other iwi and other voices.
And even just outside of Aotearoa, it's from a Māori worldview perspective, it's like a strategic group of advisors.
Yeah, and that's basically what it does. But I do want to go back to probably one of the most significant pieces of leadership that I have ever seen, and that was around COVID. Amohi ake te oro te iwi. That was his kōrero. But what it did was it led the entire Māori response across the country. And no doubt that rallying cry, that call, helped saved a number of Māori lives. And we shouldn't underestimate the call of the king to have made that. Of course, before the country was shutting down, he made that really, really. And I think it was a difficult decision to make, but to close Waikato Marae, at least 2 weeks before Jacinda Ardern made the call, but also had a plan on how we could still maintain our tikanga in that space that was safe, that gave the ability for whānau to mourn. Not ideal, but the country needed somebody to lead that, and certainly our king did that. And I think that'll go down as probably one of the most special examples of iwi Māori, the king's leadership, that we would ever see.
I think it's a really great point, because we all experience tangi on the internet, and some were close. And one of the really interesting things is that the Koroneihana the next year following was the biggest ope, where people were bringing their mate and their photographs. Were you at that one?
Yes, and I guess for the Kingitanga, we obviously have the broadcasting now, but when you think about it, they are going with the times, I guess. They are going with te ao huri. I remember talking to one of my bosses who has not been to a Koroneihana in 18 years, and never in their life have they ever thought that they were going to broadcast the Kingitanga. They were going to have these big screen TVs. And I guess for our mate, it is definitely hard having to not be at the marae because we're a kanohi type of iwi. So having to develop, I guess, a new way, a new entry into this new world with technology, because we use technology. Yeah, absolutely. Innovative. Yes, kia ora.
And he was te Kingi o te ao hangaro.
Yeah, absolutely.
He allowed and broke down some of those traditional barriers to be allowed to show Kingitanga, to show these really, really seminal and special events on a platform, the new Aotea, perhaps.
And if you haven't been to Tuurangawaewae this week, you wouldn't have seen massive screens all the way down the road. So for and tents and chairs, and so if you're a bit hot and you can't squeeze into the marae, you're sitting out there, and that's what's probably going to happen in the next few days. What happens from here on in the morning all the way through to Thursday?
Yeah, I had a little chat to some of the whānau from here through yesterday, just around, these are people that are here from 6 a.m. in the morning till 8 to 10 p.m. at night. We're on to week 2 of this kaupapa of them doing the mahi now. So I said,
because of the Koroneihana.
Because of Koroneihana and now King's passing. It's the same people who are doing the same mahi, and they are the ones that I feel, we're all mourning as te ao Māori, but they are the ones who have grown up with King and their family. And one of them said to me, "What do you mean mourning? We don't mourn, not now. We're here to do the mahi. We do the mahi. Our time will come when the motu has left.
Wow.
That's when we will mourn." And I mean, you can all see that is the experience here. They are all in their lanes, doing everything excellently, very humble, very hardworking. So I think for the true mourners of this tangihanga, their focus is on what Kingi Tuhei would have wanted, what the whānau pani need, carry on with the mahi.
On Thursday we will have an 8th Māori monarch. There are so many people who have come. Will they possibly have the biggest reception ever?
Who knows? Who knows how these things work themselves out. But certainly the people will be here first and foremost to send King off in his final journey back to Taupiri Kuwao, to be with ngā Kingi, me te Queen o te pō. And that first and foremost is the kaupapa especially for the home people. That's literally what some of the whānau in Ngāru Waia have been born to do. And it's a decision for the motu. And it's always been that way. The motu will decide.
There's going to be thousands.
Absolutely.
And so there should be. He is a king who has left a legacy far beyond just whānau here in Waikato. It will resonate.
The first water hui, we're all talking about water at the moment. He called that first water hui here at Tuurangawaewae. And that started off the conversations around good, safe water to drink. It's not seen as a resource, but certainly it found its way into the lexicon of Wellington, if you know what I mean. And that's where the entire discussion on we need to conserve that resource, our river, our tupuna.
Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou I whai whakaro kia mātou o mata. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora.
Ka te kua tō te rā ki tā tātou wānanga. We'll be back in a fortnight. We leave you with the words of the former kingmaker Anaru Tamihana. delivered in 2006 at the Tangihanga for Te Ariki Nui Dame Te Atairangi Kahu. Pai mariri kia tātou.
Today, let our hearts be ever thankful for the person whose magic has beautifully altered and reshaped our lives as we come together to remember before God the life of Te Ariki Nui Te Atairangi Kahu.